This is one of the most unique and mysterious animals in the world, the saiga. It once ranged across a huge expanse of Eurasia from the British Isles to Russia and Mongolia. Today, it exists only in the remotest parts of the Eurasian steppe and is rarely seen by humans. There is only one zoo in the whole world that has saiga, and today we're going to find out why. Firstly, we need to pick a map because we're going to be building a beautiful natural environment for our saiga to call home. I love this North American grassland map, but the land of the saiga is a land without trees, and there are trees on this map that can't be removed. The Maya's Animal Entertainment Park map is possibly even more gorgeous, but again, it's got too many trees. This is the African desert. It doesn't have a single tree, and as strange as it seems to be starting in an African desert, this is what we're going to be using to build the home of the saiga. The saiga was named in 1766, and today two subspecies are recognized: the Russian saiga that lives in Central Asia and the Mongolian saiga. They live in large herds that roam across the steppes and grasslands of Central Asia, browsing grasses and using their speed and endurance to keep safe from the wolves, which are their main predator. The ever-changing face of the steppes requires saiga to search for new routes to their habitual lands, and currently their migratory routes pass through 5 countries and all the railways, mining sites and pipelines within. The land that we'll be recreating for them is called Betpak Dala in Kazakhstan. It's a clay desert with salt marshes featuring plants like sagebrush, Siberian pea shrub and saltwort. Because we're using a desert map, I've replaced all the sand with a mixture of dirt and grass. We're going to move on to the terrain work now, and I'll tell you the story of the saiga in the modern day. The mysterious saiga first came to the world's attention in 2010 when nearly 50% of their Kazakhstan population died almost overnight. The cause of the mass population loss was a lung disease called pasteurellosis, and by 2015, over 120,000 saiga had succumbed to it, almost a third of the world's population. So why was the saiga population so small, even before the disease hit? The answer, as so often, was habitat destruction and poaching. After being hunted to local extinction in China and much of the rest of their range, Kazakhstan and Mongolia were their last strongholds. To give you an idea of the scale of the poaching issue, in June 2014, Chinese customs at the Kazakh border uncovered 66 cases containing over 2,000 saiga horns with an estimated worth of over $11 million. The horns are used to create utterly ineffective Chinese medicine, which is illegal but still widely available. In response to the crisis, charities, NPOs and the Kazakh government set up protected areas around the country, and the government started to crack down on poaching. Happily, the protected areas and poaching reduction was a success, and by 2022, the saiga population had rebounded to around 1.2 million. However, the warming climate and resulting humidity in their range is leading to bacteria common in the saiga to move into their bloodstream and cause septicemia, endangering them all over again. So that's the saiga's tale in the wild, but why are zoos not stepping in to help, as they have done with species such as Przewalski's horse, which lives in the same environment? Well, that is a whole new story. Before we get onto that, it's time to add some vegetation to our landscape, starting with sage. Sagebush is one of the main plants that can be found in this area of the world, and what we're going to do is create a little arrangement of plants and then use that to cover the whole map in some sparse vegetation so it looks like the real place. As always when working with plants, remember that plants don't tend to just grow on their own, they tend to grow in groups. So we're going to make little groups of sagebrush, this dry creosote bush, some saltwort and various others, and then we're going to spread this arrangement out so it's a lot sparser. And then when we've got one that we're happy with, we can simply copy this around the whole map, rotating it every time so we don't get any repetition. And there we can see we're starting to get some nice vegetation on this map. And now, as we always do in our natural environment builds, we're going to highlight a few areas with these bamboo poles and really go to town on the details on those areas where our animals are going to spend most of their time. And while we do that, we will find out why you won't be seeing saigas at a zoo near you anytime soon. The saiga is one of the most difficult animals in the world to keep alive in a zoo. They have evolved over millions of years with one simple defense mechanism: to run as fast as they can in the opposite direction to any perceived danger. Now, this is a common defense mechanism for animals. The issue with the saiga is that they have spent millennia living exclusively in the steppes and open grasslands of Central Asia. In these almost endless, flat expanses of grass, there are virtually no barriers to impede their progress. And when a saiga starts running, it can hit 80 kilometers per hour and it does not stop. There is another facet to their behaviour as well. Saiga are very, very skittish. They take fright very easily. Now, these two aspects to their behaviour are rarely an issue in the wild, where they can run for miles, but in a zoo environment, it's very different. In a zoo, the slightest noise can startle them and cause them to start running. And when you're running at 80 kilometers per hour and you have no concept of barriers, the results are, as you can imagine, not pretty. There are countless examples of entire herds of saiga being spooked by visitors or even urban foxes and running en masse straight into the barriers of their habitats, mortally wounding themselves in the process. The result is that keeping them alive in a zoo setting is extremely difficult. Some zoos even kept them off show to prevent them being spooked by visitors, but even then, all sorts of unavoidable noises and sights could set them off. And if you think that alone would make it difficult to keep saiga well, there's yet another issue. As soon as these animals are removed from their arid, natural environment, their risk of developing parasites and bacterial diseases increases to an extreme level. Of the few zoos that have tried to keep them over the past 100 years, such as San Diego Zoo, London, Plankendal and the Highland Wildlife Park, none of them have managed to keep them for long. And speaking of keeping things, this is a blueprint of a stupa that we built for Belmont Zoo that's going to fit absolutely perfectly into this landscape as a bit of a centerpiece. In fact, I like it so much here, we're going to have two of them. But back to the zoos. Kern Zoo in Germany developed a circular habitat for saiga with flexible barriers to try and prevent the collisions that had claimed so many lives. But whilst this did reduce the collisions, their entire herd succumbed to disease instead. So it would appear that the only way to keep saiga successfully in a zoo would be to keep them in a specially designed habitat away from the guests in a zoo that is already in a climate that exactly matches their homelands. Luckily, such a zoo exists, Almaty Zoo in Kazakhstan. In 2015, a pair of saiga were taken from a wildlife reserve in Uralsk, Kazakhstan to Almaty Zoo, and in 2019 they bred successfully. By 2023, the zoo had 9 saiga. They're kept partially off show as part of a breeding project in order to try and mitigate some of the issues that I mentioned earlier. So it would appear that if you do have exactly the right climates and you're very careful, it may actually be possible to keep saiga in a zoo. Back in Planet Zoo, that long, sad tale is the reason that we have never had a saiga in one of our zoos. It's simply not realistic. However, today we can get as close as possible to seeing these magnificent animals in their natural environment because it's time to add the habitats and introduce them to their new home. We're laying out one enormous habitat using null barriers here. It's going to go from one of the stupas that we placed at the bottom of the map all the way up to the road that we've placed in here and then back round again. And then we're going to use a few tricks to make it completely seamless so we can see our saiga going about their lives with no keepers or buildings or anything like that. So once we've run the barrier back to meet up with the first piece that we've placed down next to the stupa here, we'll then add in the small habitat gate and hide it under this bush here, and then we'll use one of the invisible paths just temporarily to create a little area outside of the habitat where we can place an animal trade centre and lots of caretakers. We've also got a second habitat for wolves up on this ridge just so that they're prowling around in the background. The Mongolian wolf that lives in this area is a subspecies of the grey wolf with a sort of sandy coat, so I will be buying exclusively timber wolves with that kind of colouring. And then for the first time ever on this channel, or indeed ever in Planet Zoo, we will buy some saiga. Let's take a look at our finished habitat. This landscape is possibly the hardest one we've ever had to build on this channel. No trees, virtually no rocks, it's all just grass and dirt, and it is so difficult to make it look good in Planet Zoo, but I am pretty happy with the results. You see some of our females coming down to the water here, and that brings us to something else to know about the males. There is yet another reason for the difficulties of keeping saiga in captivity, which I haven't touched on yet, because we should be able to see it happen in-game shortly. The male saiga are incredibly aggressive during the breeding season. They fight each other so fiercely that many of them don't survive it. As you can imagine, losing most of the males every year makes keeping a herd next to impossible without having a starting size so immense that you can absorb the losses. Happily, we can see this happening with no real animals being harmed. Let's take a look. What amazing animals these are. It makes me kind of sad that watching this or nature documentaries is probably as close as I will ever get to seeing a Saiga, and I would imagine this is as close as you can get for most of you guys as well. A trip to Kazakhstan to see one mostly off-show animal in a zoo is kind of beyond most people's budgets, but I think we've learned something about them in this video, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you next week for some more Planet Zoo.